So you bought new graphics card, cranked up game settings to the max and decided to try streaming, but you were met with encoder overload issue in OBS. Well, I have some good news and some bad news. It is fixable pretty easily, but most likely gonna have to compromise somewhere. So in this video I want to talk about some OBS and game settings if you want to stream at 1080p 60 fps. I have been streaming for over 4 years, mostly on medium budget PC, and recently changed GPU from Nvidia GPU to AMD's GPU. I did this while fully knowing that AMD is not as good for streaming, but I was curious to see difference for myself. Maybe not the wisest decision, but I like experimenting. First, I'll explain about encoder overload, how you can find out what is causing it, and then talk about possible solutions. If none of the most common solutions help, then be sure to watch near the end of the video for some other solutions that require more compromise. So I'll just say how I understand. Encoder is what translates all the code into video for you to see it. You stream something, you use encoder. Twitch and YouTube and other video platforms use their own encoder to display videos. When you edit video in software and render, it also uses encoder. This is, by the way, why stream highlights may look so bad sometimes, because we have been pushed through 3, 4, even more video encoders, each time changing or compressing video. Encoding is done either on CPU or GPU, and when you get encoder overload message in OBS, it is because either your CPU or GPU cannot handle the task. Easier way to tell is open Task Manager in Windows 10, just hit Ctrl Shift Escape, select Performance tab, and when playing games and streaming, you can observe your CPU and GPU usage. Even if you're not streaming, you can check these to see which one is more loaded, CPU or GPU, and determine maybe you need to upgrade your old CPU instead of GPU. I'm also gonna talk about a bit about memory, RAM, but that is only if you're using AMD's GPU and often use instant replay. Look at CPU and GPU graphs. You don't want either to reach 100%. CPU may spike to 100%, especially during loading screen. And to be honest, I don't have much experience with streaming on CPU encoder, but same logic should apply. It is hard to say how much more CPU or GPU power you're going to need if you stream, but it may be even up to like 50% unless you use Nvidia's GPU, because we have separate inbuilt encoder for this. I don't know if it is possible to somehow see its usage, but because it is a separate encoder, you don't really need to worry too much about streaming. Just need to select that encoder in OBS, but there may still be encoder overload problem. So let me go over some OBS settings. I am using Stream Elements, not to be confused with the Streamlabs, which recently had big oopsie. So some settings may look a bit different. First, go to Settings and in the Video tab. And I have seen some videos that got it wrong. The base canvas resolution has to be matching your monitor's resolution, and the output resolution is the resolution that you want your stream to be. If you are using 1080p monitor and you want your stream to be 720p, you use 1080p base canvas resolution and 720p stream resolution. The FPS below is important. It dictates what FPS your encoder is going to try to push. Downscale filter, I use bicubic. You're gonna have to Google if you want to know more about these. Now, Stream tab, not much to say, just set it up once and then forget it. One thing to note is currently Twitch maximum allowed bitrate is 6000. Even if your internet would allow to push much higher, keep it at or below 6000. Next, output. Output tab is where most important settings are. In the output mode, choose Advanced tab to see more settings. And under streaming sub-tab, select encoder. There are multiple different encoders, but if you have Nvidia's graphics card, definitely choose NVENC encoder. For CPU encoding, it is X264. For AMD GPU encoder, there is H264. In the brackets, it should say AMD. There may be H265 as well, which may be better. An important thing to note, even if it automatically selects and chooses it for you, still reselect them. Otherwise, you may get an error when trying to start the stream or to record, especially if you do not see these extra options. Basically, just select some other encoder and select the one that you want to use for streaming. And then these options should appear if they are not visible. In my case, I am using AMD's encoder, which is this H264. From preset below, select Twitch streaming or whichever other platform you are using. Quality preset, you may have to experiment later on. Just leave it on balance for now, but later on you may want to experiment and see if maybe speed would work better for you. The target bitrate for 1080p 60 fps, you want as close to 6000 bitrate as possible if your internet allows. You want your upload speed to be around 8 to 10,000 megabits per second if you want to have stable 6000 bitrate stream. I have tested streaming 1080p 60 fps with 5000 bitrate and even a bit lower, and it looked almost the same as 6000 bitrate, but intensive games like racing games or especially Path of Exile will pixelate the stream no matter what. If you want less pixelation in your stream, you may have to lower streaming resolution below 1080p, maybe 900p or 720p. There is no magic fix for this. If you know it, let us know in the comments below, but this is where compromises have to be made. Other things in OBS, if you plan on recording with it, go to a recording sub-tab. You're gonna want to enter much higher bitrate in here because you're gonna be recording at a higher bitrate. But again, if you do not see these settings, you're gonna have to reselect the encoder. If it has auto or the same as streaming, just select the one that you want to be using, and these settings should appear. Then in the targeted bitrate, you may want to bump it up to like 20,000 or even up to 40,000 or even maybe higher if you are working with videos higher than 1080p resolution. Keyframe interval, all I remember is 2, and it is important for something that you won't remember anyway. One last OBS setting is in advanced tab. Process priority. Set it at least above normal. I have tried setting highest priority, but then game starts having some performance problems, especially if you are pushing near the limits. Keep this at above normal and experiment with lowering or increasing it. So these are OBS settings, but there are more things to talk about. You may still be getting encoder overload problem, and unfortunately this is where you may have to make the biggest compromise: game settings. One biggest thing is game FPS. If after trying other methods you are still encountering encoder overload, then cap your game FPS or turn on VSync in game. Even if you can push hundreds of FPS in game, that doesn't mean that encoder can handle that. This is what happens when FPS is too high, encoder gets overloaded and it becomes a slideshow, pixelated slideshow. Path of Exile can be very intensive game and pixelation is very common, and this clip quality is extra bad because it ran through editing software and its encoder, then back to YouTube to encode and compress even more, but even on stream it does look really bad. Like I mentioned, you may have to lower stream resolution to 720p, cap FPS in game, or even lower some graphics settings in game. Other thing is to use CPU to encode stream, but in games like Path of Exile that is not really an option. Or in game, instead of DirectX 12 or 11, try using Vulkan and then stream using GPU encoder. From what I heard in the past, it seems that Vulkan uses more of your CPU, which should lower the stress on your GPU, but my memory may have some gaps. Either way, I fixed encoder overload by using VSync and capping my game FPS to 75, which matches my monitor refresh rate. There are still a couple more things outside game and OBS. Game mode for Windows, NVIDIA recommends to turn it on, but everyone else says otherwise, so keep it off. Lastly, if you are using NVIDIA's or AMD's recording and instant replay function, you may want to also lower some settings there. I can only show AMD settings, one particular setting, and I mentioned at the start something to do with RAM. After opening Adrenaline software, default is Alt-R, click on Settings cog, go to Record and Stream, scroll down a bit, under the media, instant replay buffer. If you have SSD, you may want to switch this to system memory. Of course, if you got enough RAM. I have more than enough, 32 gigs, so I don't know how much RAM you need for this, but basically instant replay is just a recording done non-stop, but also simultaneously it is being deleted. This can shorten lifespan of your SSD, because SSD likes to store things and read from it, but not constantly write in it. RAM, on the other hand, is designed for constant flow of information. I have also chosen to save all recordings on my hard drive. Funny thing, I forgot to do that for 2 years when I built this PC. Under recording settings, you may also want to adjust a couple of things. I used to record at 40,000 bitrate, but that was an overkill. YouTube compresses 1080p bitrate down to like 10,000 or even less. So that covers OBS settings. Let me know in the comments below if I missed something other than just buy a better PC or use streaming PC. Not everyone can afford that. In the next video I want to talk about my new GPU and how it performs in Path of Exile, Cyberpunk and a couple other games. For now, thank you for watching and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.